Across 2024 to 2025, Mnangagwa repeatedly declared that he is a constitutionalist who will not serve beyond 2028, the end of his second term under Zimbabwe's 2013 constitution. This line was publicly relayed, often emphatically, by ZANU-PF's Secretary for Legal Affairs, Patrick Chiwenga, who said he consulted Mnangagwa multiple times and received the same answer: no extension beyond 2028. Coverage of these statements appears in local outlets and video clips from party conferences, with reports emphasizing that Mnangagwa had a hand in drafting the current constitution and would not violate it. In October 2024, for example, Pindula News quoted Chiwenga detailing 3 separate consultations, August, mid-September, and late October, in which the president reaffirmed the 2028 exit. The same theme appears in other accounts summarizing conference remarks and constitutionalist rhetoric. This posture is consistent with the constitutional provisions at stake. Section 91(1) sets term limits. Section 328(7) is explicit that a sitting president cannot benefit from a constitutional amendment extending term limits. Academic and media analyses point to these clauses as the legal bedrock constraining any 2030 project. Bottom line words. Mnangagwa's official line is that he will uphold the Constitution and retire in 2028. On the record, he disclaims any personal appetite for a longer stay. If we pivot from what Mnangagwa says to what is happening around him, the picture changes. Resolutions and mobilization for ED 2030. At the 2025 ZANU-PF conference in Mutare, October 18, 2025, the party resolved to begin the process of extending Mnangagwa's tenure to 2030, framed as a 2-year alignment with Vision 2030 and development continuity. Justice Minister Ziambi told reporters that delegates instructed government to draft the relevant constitutional changes. Al Jazeera and The Star, South Africa, reported the resolution and noted the party's parliamentary leverage, while also flagging likely legal challenges. Follow-on reporting by Newsday and Zimbabwe Situation captured subsequent feedback meetings, where senior figures urged Parliament to act and prepared supporters for a referendum campaign. The symbolism, 2030 Endea Emmerson, and New Regalia. Political messaging has been visible and loud. New Regalia branded ED 2030 circulated. Parliamentarians broke into the chant 2030 Endea Emmerson after Mnangagwa's 2025 State of the Nation address, an unmistakable signal of the caucus mood. Even as some reports said Mnangagwa distanced himself from slogan-mongering on several occasions, provincial structures have been encouraged or felt compelled to pass endorsements, intensifying intra-party pressure. From no extension to number 1 is irreversible. The most telling indicator is the shift in tone among legal and political stewards of the party. After stressing Mnangagwa's constitutionalist stance in 2024, Chiwenga later described the 2030 resolution as effectively irrevocable, saying government and parliament were now seized with implementation, language that implies institutional momentum beyond mere chatter. Local outlets captured his no backtracking line and the framing of the process as a march through the Ministry of Justice and the legislature. Bottom line, actions. Despite denials, the party machinery, conference resolutions, provincial rallies, slogans, legal choreography, has moved forward. The choreography looks coordinated, not spontaneous. Vice President Constantino Chiwenga emerges as the most prominent internal skeptic. Multiple reports indicate he has refused to chant 2030 slogans and has set himself against any extension push. Analysts argue that his stance provides the focal counterweight within ZANU-PF at a time when opposition parties and civil society are weakened. Chiwenga's anti-corruption rhetoric, targeting mbingas and elite capture, has also been read as a rebuke of a political economy clustered around the presidency. In late October 2025, coverage suggested Chiwenga exposed a plan to suspend elections for up to 10 years via a BBI Breaking Barriers Initiative document, framed by allies as nation-building but condemned by others as a pretext to prolong rule. Whether or not this document was ever a formal government program, the fact that it surfaced in Politburo discussions underscores a deep factional struggle over succession and constitutional norms. Chiwenga also appears to enjoy segments of support from war veterans and some provincial figures who reject ED 2030. Several statements from veterans groupings explicitly back constitutionalism and signal loyalty to a Chiwenga succession. These public rejections matter because the war vets were kingmakers in 2017 and retain symbolic and mobilisational clout. Bottom line, Chiwenga is not merely abstaining. He is an active internal veto player whose opposition elevates the costs and risks of pushing ED 2030. Under the 2013 Constitution, amending presidential term limits requires 1. A two-thirds majority in both houses of Parliament, and 2. Because the change touches the term of the president, approval in a national referendum. Additionally, Section 328(7) bars the incumbent from benefiting from an extension, so drafters would need to craft changes that either redefine tenure without formally altering limits or attempt more radical alterations and then litigate. The ruling party currently claims the parliamentary numbers to initiate the amendment, but the referendum stage is the tripwire. Reports in Newsday Zimbabwe Situation stress fears of coercion or manipulation, while Al Jazeera and others repeated legal experts' warnings that any attempt would face court challenges and international scrutiny. That anticipation has already materialized. Constitutional court applications have been filed seeking declaratory relief against the 2030 resolution and any legislative steps flowing from it. There is also a judicial politics angle. Opinion columns and investigative pieces have alleged scenarios in which friendly litigation could be used to generate precedents or technical dismissals that pave the way for tenure extension without a clean popular mandate. Lawyers like Tendai Biti and advocates cited in the press have signaled readiness to resist such tactics. Even if some of these allegations are speculative, they illustrate how contested and fragile the legal terrain has become. Bottom line, the constitutional route is arduous and politically explosive. Any 2030 outcome would demand a referendum victory or controversial legal innovations that would invite intense domestic and international dispute. How do we reconcile Mnangagwa's denials with pro-extension mobilization by party structures and allies? Plausible deniability and testing the waters. One explanation is strategic ambiguity. By maintaining a constitutionalist public stance while not disciplining pro-2030 champions, Mnangagwa can gauge public reaction, international tolerance, and internal factional balances without personally owning the push. This tactic is widely inferred by reporters who note that loyalists started advocating extensions soon after the disputed 2023 election and accelerated after 2024. The Mutare 2025 resolution crystallized that trajectory while still giving the president space to claim he didn't initiate it. Succession management. A second explanation is succession control. Analysts in regional and Zimbabwean outlets argue that delaying the transition preserves Mnangagwa's leverage over 2027-2028 intra-party bargaining and reduces the risk of a fractured handover to a rival, most obviously Chiwenga. Public remarks by party spokespeople emphasize that there is no automatic chosen one, a sign the leadership wants to keep the field fluid and avoid early coalescence around the vice president. Development narrative cover. Proponents tie the extension to Vision 2030, arguing that continuity is needed to complete infrastructure and economic programs. This narrative supplies a policy frame rather than a naked power logic. It has been deployed at rallies and feedback meetings, with senior figures telling supporters that leadership change would lose momentum. Critics counter that development outcomes since 2018 don't support the claim, and that governance, not tenure length, is the binding constraint. Bottom line, the mixed signals are likely deliberate, allowing momentum to build from below and from within party organs, while the president preserves an image of fidelity to the Constitution unless the path looks sufficiently safe. Public discussion forums and civic dialogues have shown skepticism toward extending the term. A January 2025 site report summarizing an X-space discussion highlighted citizens' frustration with unmet promises, for example, load shedding, free education, and resistance to rewarding underperformance with extra time. That sentiment does not automatically translate into referendum outcomes under current political conditions, but it indicates headwinds for any clean popular mandate. Economically, persistent inflation, unemployment, and service delivery problems compete with the stability via continuity narrative. International media, for example Al Jazeera, contextualize the extension debate within a story of deteriorating socio-economic conditions and tightened civic space, conditions that would sharpen external scrutiny if the process looks manipulated. Bottom line, even with parliamentary numbers, the referendum politics and reputational costs are non-trivial, especially if Chiwenga's camp continues to frame ED 2030 as unconstitutional and self-serving. Bringing the strands together, the answer depends on whether we privilege statements or structures. On the record, Mnangagwa says no extension. Chinamasa vouched for repeated denials in 2024. This is a clear doctrinal line, and if taken at face value, implies non-support. In practice, the ruling party's apex decision-making forum adopted an extension resolution. Ministers and Politburo members have popularized it. Provincial organs are mobilizing. Legal road mapping is underway. Meanwhile, there has been no visible sanction of prominent advocates. These are hallmarks of at least tacit, if not active, support. Given the scale and coordination of the ED 2030 push, it is implausible that it could advance this far against the president's wishes. In hierarchical parties, especially those with a strong security state legacy, such a flagship project typically doesn't gain official resolution status, parliamentary mobilization, and branded regalia unless the leader is at minimum permissive. The absence of a presidential clampdown, coupled with the careful use of surrogates, suggests strategic consent rather than ignorance or powerlessness. What could happen next? Scenario A: managed retreat. Sensing legal hazards and factional resistance, Mnangagwa could eventually disown the project, instruct party organs to stand down, and double down on the constitutionalist brand. This would preserve international optics and avoid a bruising referendum. Indicators would include public rebukes of ED 2030 champions and a halt to parliamentary preparations. Costs: emboldening Chiwenga's camp and accelerating succession jockeying. Scenario B: full court press. If internal numbers look secure and polling, formal or informal, suggests the referendum can be managed, the party proceeds to amendment bills and referendum planning, backed by a heavy Vision 2030 campaign. Expect intensified legal contests, like the Gambakwe Muzadzi case, and sharper elite ruptures. Risks: reputational damage, social unrest, or a referendum setback that weakens the president in the endgame. Scenario C: legal engineering. A path relying on interpretive arguments about terms versus tenure, or friendly litigation to create a precedential glide path without a clean referendum. This would be the most controversial route, inviting domestic and international backlash and likely counter-litigation by opposition lawyers. Signal: proliferating test cases and opaque constitutional court maneuvers like those warned about in critical opinion pieces. Does Mnangagwa support the extension? Officially, no. Practically, yes, at least tacitly. His repeated denials preserve constitutionalist branding and international cover. But the sustained, coordinated, and increasingly institutionalized 2030 drive, originating in party resolutions, promoted by cabinet-level figures, and normalized in parliamentary theatrics, does not proceed without the president's permission. The cumulative evidence indicates strategic ambiguity in service of political optionality. What could stop it? A combination of Chiwenga's resistance, legal defeats or delays, referendum risk, and international elite cost calculations could produce a managed retreat. Conversely, if those barriers prove navigable, expect a full court press framed around Vision 2030 and continuity. In Zimbabwe's political grammar, what leaders do not say can be as significant as what they do. On balance, Mnangagwa's silence toward pro-extension mobilizers and his allies' escalating efforts speak louder than his denials. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.